Health Coalition. This is a press conference about Bill 218, which is the bill that indemnifies long-term care and retirement home operators, among others, from legal liability for negligence pertaining to their behavior during the pandemic and people who have been exposed or infected by or died as a result of or harmed by COVID-19. We have been extremely concerned about this piece of legislation. It does not in any way serve the public interest, and it creates even more hardship for the families who have already suffered so horribly as a result of the negligence and the inadequate response of long-term care and retirement homes during the pandemic. Many families, more than 2,000 people have lost loved ones in long-term care homes alone during the pandemic. And for them, at every step of the way, trying to access accountability and justice has been impossible. At this point, families are looking, it's too late for their loved ones, and they're looking for any possible closure and access to justice. And this legislation takes away their final access to justice, or it makes it much, much more difficult. And we just think it's wrong. It's wrong on every level. It's morally wrong. It's dangerous as a message and legally as well for the long-term care homes and retirement homes industry to be let off the hook in this way. It's very, very serious. And unfortunately, the government is moving forward very, very quickly with this bill. We asked that they extend the public hearings just by one day in order to even hear from all of the families who had lost loved ones, whose loved ones have died as a result of negligence and as a result of inadequate response and poor management and poor behavior by the homes. And government MPPs who have a majority on the committee, the standing committees, would not even allow one more day of hearings for everyone to be heard. We asked that the government amend the legislation to carve out long-term care homes and retirement homes. And government MPPs, the Ford MPPs, used their majority to vote down amendments to that effect. Now we've been informed that the bill is being moved up for third reading in an attempt to get it through as quickly as possible over the opposition of thousands and thousands of Ontarians who oppose. Our email box filled up over the weekend. It is full from people sending emails to their MPPs in opposition to this bill and asking for a carve out for long-term care and retirement homes. This bill is a terrible piece of legislation. When you look at it at the end, what it says is that long-term care homes and retirement homes will not be held accountable for their negligence during the pandemic. And even if they will not be held accountable for even behaving in what would normally be considered by courts to be a good faith manner. So for behaving responsibly and with competence, reasonably and with competence. So under this legislation, even the minimal requirement that homes behave with competence and reasonably has been removed. The ability for people to sue for negligence has been removed. This is just wrong, and there's just no justification for it. The government has said that they want to indemnify, voluntary sports leagues and small volunteer organizations. They can absolutely do that. All we've asked for is a carve out of long-term care and retirement homes. They've said that they need to fast track this bill. That's false. It's a retroactive bill. They could pass it a month from now or a month and a half from now. It would still be retroactive back to the beginning of the pandemic, March 17th, which is when the bill is retroactive. So none of the sort of public messaging that they have put out actually holds any water. These are red herrings. We have asked the lawyers to search for litigation The only litigation that anybody can find is against the long-term care industry and the government for negligence and for incompetent and unreasonable response in the face of the pandemic. And that is what is indemnified in this bill. We believe that that is what the goal of this bill is. And so why would they do it? Well, if you look at key cabinet ministers, the premier, you can see that there are very many close ties with the long-term care industry, not just 3 former premiers that have sat on or sit on boards of the for-profit long-term care home industry, but staff all through ministers' offices who are former lobbyists, close former lobbyists for the long-term care industry, staff from ministers' offices who go to the long-term care industry and lobby for them, all kinds of close political connections to key ministers and members who are voting on this act, which benefits only the long-term care industry at the expense of the public interest, at the expense of the family members and the people, the residents of long-term care homes, and which does not serve the public interest. It only serves private interests. And so we've taken the extraordinary step for us of making a complaint to the Integrity Commissioner. We're asking those MPPs who are in a conflict of interest due to their close ties and political donations from the long-term care industry to recuse themselves from the vote on Bill 218. We believe it's a conflict of interest, and we're asking the Integrity Commissioner to investigate. I'll turn it over now to Gary Will, who's a managing partner in the law firm Will Davidson LLP. Gary.
Okay, thanks very much, Natalie, and I want to thank the Ontario Health Coalition for arranging this press conference and inviting me to speak. We're at a very important crossroad, because this bill could pass as early as today and possibly tomorrow. It's on the schedule for tomorrow. And this bill would dramatically impact the rights of tens of thousands of residents of long-term care homes in Ontario and their families. And so far, 2,000 residents in long-term care homes and retirement homes have passed away due to COVID. And we're now going through a second wave, which is racing through many long-term care homes. And that's going to add to the number of infections and number of deaths. And as a province, we really have a choice to make. You know, we can protect the vulnerable, or we can protect the powerful. We can protect elderly residents who are entirely dependent on their caregivers for their quality of daily living, or we can protect the long-term care lobby. We can protect the Bobyk and the Ferreira families, who you will be hearing from shortly, or we can protect multi-billion-dollar corporations like Extendicare. And Extendicare does have a history of operating in the United States. They had major operations in the United States up until 2014. The US Department of Justice investigated Extendicare under the False Claims Act and brought a lawsuit against them, essentially alleging that the services that were provided by Extendicare were so deficient to be essentially worthless. That lawsuit, which was joined by many state attorney generals, was settled in 2014. And Extendicare paid a record fine of $38 million under the False Claims Act. They also entered a corporate integrity agreement at that time. And that lasted for about 2 weeks, because in November 2014, they sold off their American portfolio for $870 million and made an announcement that they were moving into the Canadian industry. So they bought up a number of long-term care homes in Ontario and agreed to manage other homes. One of those homes was Orchard Villa, which now has the largest outbreak of COVID infections and deaths in the province. Extendicare, which operates a number of homes in Ontario, has had a number of complaints against them. Starting with Orchard Villa, they've been investigated by the Ministry of long-term care on numerous occasions. There have been 43 days of investigation at Orchard Villa. There were 65 warnings, 13 compliance orders, and 3 matters were referred to the director. We issued our Orchard Villa claim on May 25th. It was served on the 26th. And on May the 27th, Doug Ford held a press conference, and that was when the military report was released, which was contained horrendous stories of what was occurring at 5 long-term care homes, including Orchard Villa. And Doug Ford described the facts in the report as heartbreaking and gut-wrenching. He said that the conditions were appalling and disgusting. He promised Ontario that there would be a major investigation and that there would be accountability and responsibility and justice for the families. So fast forward to November, not a single charge has been laid. No one has lost their license. No one has lost their job. And we now have the immunity legislation, which protects the bad actors. Not all of them are bad actors, but many of them are. And there's a few that have accounted for the vast majority of the deaths and infections. This legislation takes away people's rights to go to court and allege negligence against long-term care. And it denies families their right to a day in court. So we have the accountability and responsibility, which Doug Ford talked about in May, turning into immunity in November. So the choice was made by the Progressive Conservative Party to choose the powerful over the vulnerable, to choose the long-term care lobby over residents of long-term care homes. And the Ontario Health Coalition, in their letter to the Integrity Commissioner, raise a number of really critical issues about conflict of interest, which ought to be investigated fully before there's a vote on this legislation. We have 3 former Progressive Conservative premiers with ties to the long-term care lobby. Mike Harris as the chair of Chartwell, Bill Davis on the board of directors of Rivera, and so many former government members who are now lobbyists in the long-term care industry. All of those allegations ought to be carefully investigated before there's a vote on this. The long-term care lobby has donated $660,000 to political parties since 2007. So in closing, I want to introduce you to 2 of the family members who lost loved ones in long-term care homes. And I want to introduce Cara Ferreira, who lost her mom on April 28th, 2020 at the Holland Christian home. She is the representative plaintiff in that action. So go ahead, Cara.
Yes, thank you very much, Gary. My family and I are absolutely appalled to hear about the proposed Bill 218, which will effectively remove any responsibility or accountability of the long-term care facilities where COVID-19 outbreaks could have otherwise been prevented. My mother was Elise Arthur. We moved her into a long-term care facility not even a year and a half before she contracted COVID-19. It was a very difficult decision for my family to make, but ultimately we believed that she would receive better care than even our own family could provide. In hindsight, now that we have lost my mother to COVID-19, and because I have lived through the agonizing weeks leading up to her death, I now see how wrong we were to provide the long-term care facility with our trust. Had I known that they would potentially be held to no standard of care, or as Bill 218 states, good faith or an honest effort, whether reasonable or not, my family would have made a very different decision about her care. My mother was a resident of Holland Christian Homes, which was one of the 5 long-term care facilities that the military was sent to assist in April. My mother reported staff not changing PPE, which is a fact that was later confirmed in the military report. Even more heart-wrenching was when we learned that our mother's roommate had COVID-like symptoms and there was no action being taken to protect my mother. Instead, she was confined to a room with an ill patient even after testing negative for COVID-19. Additionally, the facility wouldn't even confirm the roommate's COVID-19 test results, citing it was confidential. Following my mother's death, we learned the roommate had tested positive for COVID-19. Who would ever place a well patient in the same room with a COVID-19 positive patient? To us, this was a death sentence. If this bill is passed, then those responsible will not be held accountable. If this bill is passed, then you are allowing for someone else's grandmother, grandfather, mother, or father to die this way too. We need to take action and we need to change and we need to keep our elders safe. We can't forget that we're talking about a virus here. With 100% certainty, this will happen again and again. We need consequences to ensure changes are made to the long-term care system. Picture your own loved one in the same situation, and I ask you, do you want to be the one that passes Bill 218? Please, I beg of you, to protect our vulnerable elders and to keep them safe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kara, for that. And I now want to turn it over to Irene Bobyk. And Irene lost her mother on April 9th of this year at the Lundy Manor retirement home, and she's the representative plaintiff in that class action. Go ahead, Irene.
Thank you, Gary. President of Lundy Manor in Niagara Falls. Although she was wheelchair bound, she was an avid participant in all manners of activities at the home and had developed special relationships with many of the residents there. She enjoyed playing cards and bingo, her morning exercise classes, Sunday mass, etc. She was a vibrant, amazing woman. She was a selfless humanitarian who left a lasting impression on everyone she met. Her family meant the world to her, and we grieve and miss her every day. In March of this year, my mother Rose started presenting with COVID-like symptoms. On April 4th, she was hospitalized and later tested positive for COVID-19. She battled courageously for 5 days and ultimately passed away. She was 88. My mother was one of the 19 residents who contracted the virus at Lundy Manor, and all subsequently perished. I feel that the management at Lundy Manor were responsible for those deaths due to their inaction, negligence, and total disregard of the government protocols and directives for dealing with a pandemic situation in their care home by not initiating or enforcing lockdown procedures in a timely manner, by not sanitizing reusable bingo or playing cards or exercise equipment between use, and by allowing outsiders into the senior home after lockdown was ordered by the government, and by hosting a pub night while infected residents were slowly dying from the COVID virus on the floors above them. Bill 218 seeks to protect the very for-profit corporations that did not protect our loved ones in their care. It was well known in advance that long-term care homes were housing the population most vulnerable to the virus. Bill 218 will serve to protect the guilty and punish the innocent. Death of our loved ones go unpunished. What incentive will they have to change their ways? We as a society are held accountable for our actions. If we break the law, there are consequences. Multi-billion-dollar corporations which broke the law. It was the greed of the for-profit corporations that caused the pain, suffering, and death of our loved ones, as well as the pain, suffering. Please do not pass Bill 218, or nothing will ever change to prevent other catastrophes within the long-term care systems in the future. Please hold those care providers who did not follow the rules accountable for their actions and not further penalize the families who have already lost so much. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to thank you so much, Irene and Kara. We're so sorry about the loss of your moms. And I'm going to move on to Duff Conacher. Duff is our last speaker. Will be just a few minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. For media, could you please Just, you don't have to put your question in the chat, but if you have a question, could you just identify in the chat just with your name and which media outlet you're from? That would be great. And Duff, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I'm happy to speak to the issue of the conflicts of interest, really a layer cake of conflicts of interest that undermine the public interest in this situation. Although I'm obviously not happy with the situation of the bill and that is just clearly not in the public interest. The donations that have flowed from the long-term care industry to all political parties, including the Progressive Conservatives, over the years are legal and are actually exempted from creating conflicts of interest under the Integrity Act for MPPs that we have in the province. But no one should be fooled. It is essentially a legalized bribery system. And just because it's legal does not mean it's ethical at all. And it does create conflicts of interest, clearly. It's just that politicians have drafted the rules to allow this legalized bribery system to continue. Secondly, there are several people who have worked either on the campaign with helping to elect the Ford government or with the Ford government and are now out there lobbying for the long-term care industry, as set out in the complaint that the Ontario Health Coalition has filed today. Michael Wilson, Melissa Lantzman, Patrick Toons, Lauren McDonald, and Braden Akers. And the Lapdog Integrity Commissioner, David Wake, has unfortunately issued a ruling that is truly ridiculous. He claims that the conflict of interest created by working for a minister or working on a campaign and helping a premier and his ministers get elected, that conflict of interest disappears after 12 months. And of course it doesn't. It continues for years, if not for their entire political career, because these people helped them win power or have worked for the minister afterwards. Unfortunately, the Integrity Commissioner has rolled over like a lapdog and set this 1-year cooling off period. Every other Integrity Commissioner, Ethics Commissioner across the country that has looked at these situations has said that the conflict of interest lasts for multiple years. Now, the Federal Court of Appeal ruled back in 2009 unanimously that as long as there's some sense of obligation that you have to the person who is lobbying you, that's a conflict of interest and means the lobbyist cannot lobby you. And of course, that sense of obligation continues for years after they've helped you win power or helped you as a minister working as staff. But again, the Integrity Commissioner has legalized this. But again, no one should be fooled. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. The conflict of interest is real. The lobbyists lobbying the ministers on this situation are creating a real conflict of interest, and it means that those ministers and any MPs being lobbied by those people as well should be stepping aside. Under the law, it's my opinion that they are required to recuse themselves from voting on this bill. I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
So Duff, sorry, could you just clarify for the media, in your view, it is a violation of the law?
It is for these ministers and MPPs, given the lobbyists who are lobbying for the industry, and that those lobbyists helped the government get elected or have worked for some of the key ministers. And also, just to mention another name, Carly Lewis, who was a lobbyist for the industry, now is with Christine Elliott's office. If she took part in any of the decision-making or even with regard to the communications on this issue, then I believe that she violated the ethics rules that cover ministerial staff. So it's a layer cake of conflicts of interest. And I believe that the Members' Integrity Act requires MPPs and ministers who are being lobbied by these people who helped the government win power, that they are in a conflict of interest. That means that they are required by the law to step aside and not take part in this vote, or any discussions or debates or any future votes on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll open it up for questions from the media. Thank you.
Yeah. So once again, if anyone has any questions, please indicate in the chat that you have a question, and then we'll open the floor to you. Okay, Sue-Ann has a question. Sue-Ann Levy, go ahead.
Sorry, just unmuting. I'll lead it off. Just want to ask you, have any lessons from, and anyone can answer this, any lessons been learned from the first wave now that it's raging through long-term care homes in the second wave? And what we call the second wave?
Well, I can answer that. Unfortunately, in what we're seeing in the second wave is that the lessons of the first wave have not been learned. We're seeing long-term care homes where testing is too slow, where residents are kept in the same rooms with residents who have COVID-like symptoms for days before tests are done or before test results are obtained. That isolation, so cohorting and segregation of COVID positive from COVID negative residents is not happening within days. That access to PPE is terrible. That staff still are not changing gowns. In some homes, they don't have enough. In other homes, they're dissuading staff from using N95 masks, even staff that are working with COVID positive residents. We have seen staffing crumble, absolutely crumble. I have never seen anything like it. It's been bad for years, but this is the worst I have ever seen. Staffing crumble in the homes. And so we're hearing of staffing levels that, I mean, are the worst that we have ever heard. And this is continuing. And in those homes, people are calling out on Facebook, on Twitter for the military to come in. Families are calling out. They're begging the government to send in help to the homes. There are a handful of homes that have management that have been taken over temporarily, but that's it. There's a number now where the relationships are kind of voluntary partner relationships that are ad hoc and partial, but that's it. There is no systematic response from the government that in every home where there's an outbreak, they get in there, they make sure they're staffed, they make sure they're following proper infection protocols, that there's PPE and so on. I'll give you an example. Last night, I heard from a nurse who's in a home. It's a home, one of the village type ones. The other nurse called in sick. So she was running from house to house. There was no other nurse. There were 2 PSWs, two were not in. Because they're also sick. There's a COVID outbreak in the home. And so one nurse covering 40 residents per house, 2 PSWs, that's it. And that was the night. They are given a video every day about what PPE they should use. And the video says that they shouldn't use N95 masks unless it's an absolute emergency. And that's the training that they're being given. The PSWs have to ask for access to an N95 mask. At this point, in a home with an outbreak, that's the situation. And so you can imagine what the care is like for those residents in the home. They won't be being fed. They won't have baths. They won't be repositioned. There's no way to do it. I mean, they're racing to keep up with medications. So that is the current situation. We're now seeing COVID-19, as you know well, more than anyone, Sue-Ann, march through the homes to the point where there are 9, I believe it's 9 with more than 100 infected. Some homes have every single resident infected. And at this point, what has happened? I mean, this is our point. There have been no fines. No licenses have been yanked. There has been no accountability. There's no actual measures from the government to enforce reasonable and competent response from the homes. There are no measures to get additional staff in across the board. And in fact, they just undermined the PSWs by bringing in even lower paid workers to replace their jobs. Cannot believe that they would do that. And now they're pushing through with the utmost speed legislation that would remove even legal liability for negligence and incompetence and unreasonable behavior by the homes. That's what's happened. In a nutshell, it is so wrong. We just have to do everything possible to try and stop this.
Can I just ask a follow-up? How many homes are in outbreak in Ontario? And are homes getting sick patients to the hospitals quickly enough? Because that was a problem in the first wave.
Yeah, so there's more than 50 now in outbreak in Ontario. And the numbers have just exploded. The numbers in the outbreaks have just in the last 3 weeks have exploded. We're back heading towards the very height of the first wave at this point. And actually, I think it's much worse because the homes have less resilience to be able to deal with it. There's less staff than in the first wave, significantly less staff than in the first wave. And I think it's moving actually a lot more quickly now than it was even at the height of the first wave. But we're just comparing the numbers. And sorry, what was the second part of it?
Oh, are homes getting people to hospital fast enough who are really sick?
I've seen retirement homes that are moving out residents in large numbers, but in long-term care homes, it still seems that many, there'll be homes like Extended Care West End Villa where only 4 went to the hospital, I think in the end, and yet 130 plus staff and residents were infected and more than 19 died. And I'd have to update those numbers. Those are from a few weeks ago, but no. So in many long-term care homes, only a handful are going to hospital. But it seems that the retirement homes are a little quicker in some cases, not in all. Again, there is no systematic response from the Ministry of Health. There's just none. It's so shocking. But so no, the short answer is no. And I'm sorry, I didn't know if anyone wanted to add in from the others on that.
Yeah, so Sue-Ann, in relation to your question, we've had a problem in the long-term care industry for years and possibly even decades. And it was well known to the government, even before COVID, that there were major breaches of the standard of care at these homes. And we know that there's been hundreds of investigations carried out by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. And they would investigate complaints and they would issue orders and they would publish these orders on their website, which is accessible to all, but there was never any consequences to that wrongdoing. No one lost their license, no one lost their job, no one was prosecuted for incompetence and negligence and gross negligence in many cases. And now, the problem has gotten worse. And what has the government done? Rather than crack down and enforce standards, they've provided immunity, which is exactly the wrong thing to do. If you want the standard of care to increase at these homes, you have to enforce the standards in some way and not give them carte blanche and immunity from lawsuits. That's the worst thing that could be done. And that's why we're asking for an exemption for long-term care homes and have the ordinary, well understood laws of negligence apply so that these homes are accountable and responsible for their actions.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, so if you did not receive, we did send the full text of the complaint out to all of you. If you didn't get that, could you email us at ohc@simpatico.ca and we will send the full text of the complaint to you. We're asking today that the Integrity Commissioner will investigate, and we're asking that the MPPs who are in conflicts of interest recuse themselves from the vote. We're reiterating our request to the Ford government to carve out long-term care and retirement homes from this legislation. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to all the speakers. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.